Initializing Enduring Play Podcast Season 1 engine. Decompressing audio. Synchronizing waveforms. Reticulating splines. Launching Podcast Lobby. Welcome back to Enduring Play, the podcast where we explore what it takes to create video games that don't just survive, but thrive. I'm your host, Cheryl Platts, video game designer, director, and author of the Game Development Strategy Guide from Rosenfeld Media. In this first season of the Enduring Play podcast, we focus on going deep with some of the folks who were interviewed for my book and get the full story. Loading. Episode description. In this episode, I had the joy of reconnecting with incredibly versatile artist, designer, and creative leader Tamara Knoss, who I first met when we both worked on The Sims Bustin' Out for the Game Boy Advance. At the time, I was working for Tamara's publisher, so this episode pulls back the veil on the relationship between publisher and developer in a unique way through first-hand storytelling. You'll learn what it was like shipping games on tiny cartridges measured in megabytes, and what we faced as one of the 7 launch titles for the Nintendo DS. Tamara is currently a senior technical UI designer at Wizards of the Coast, but does not speak on behalf of the company in this episode. Full disclosure, her title changed after recording, so some references might not quite line up. This episode also captures that indie game studio life from our time at Kryptonite Games. Before we get started, a note. This was recorded before I started at my current role at the Pokemon Company International, which is partially owned by Nintendo. My time working with Tamara was shipping games on Nintendo platforms, the Game Boy Advance and the Nintendo DS. You're going to hear a lot about those platforms today as we discuss our past. This podcast is not endorsed or sponsored by Nintendo. All opinions are my own. Tamara represents the true interdisciplinary curiosity that elevates the best game development, and I'm certain everyone will gain something from this conversation. Let's get into the game. Player 1, Cheryl Platts. Player 2, Tamara Knoss. Podcast level, start. I'm so excited today to be here with an old friend and former colleague, Tamara Knoss. Thank you so much for being here today, Tamara. Tamara has presented herself as UX UI artist and unicorn, so there's a lot to unpack there. Loading. Podcast level 1. A unicorn's career journey. And maybe that's a great place to start, Tamara.
Yeah.
That's a very unique title. How did you get to be where you are today, like UX UI artist / unicorn?
So typically a unicorn is described as someone who has the ability to do a little bit of everything or a lot of everything. I started back in 2000, November of 2000 was when I started in video games. And I had actually gone to school. I went to Vancouver Film School up in Canada to become a classical animator. Like my initial plan was to become a television animator, work in movies. I wanted to work on those sidekick characters, that just the really quirky kind of stuff. And when I graduated, that was exactly at the same time that they decided to declare 2D animation dead, and that 3D animation was where everything was. So I ended up looking for jobs and found a listing for a place called, at the time it was called No Wonder, and ended up getting a job as a character animator on Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Was my very first job for the Game Boy Advance, and got to animate Harry Potter. Hand-drawn 2D pixel animation was a great time. And then during production of that game, there was an E3 convention, and everybody saw Tony Hawk Pro Skater on the GBA. And oh my God, it looked 3D because they had basically taken all the 3D assets and rendered them out to 2D and stuck them in the game. And everybody's like, oh my God, it's 3D. No, it was fake. But because of that, we had to change everything in the game. So all of these really, really charming, beautiful 2D hand animations of all the characters and everything, we had to scrap them. And fortunately, we had 3D assets. We animated them, re-rendered them out, and made the game look a lot less charming, but it looked more cutting edge. So that's how I got started in the industry.
Loading. Narrative cutscene. Development for the Game Boy Advance. You're going to hear a lot about the GBA, or the Game Boy Advance, during today's conversation, as Tamara and I collaborated on several Game Boy Advance games together. I was on the EA, or Electronic Arts, production team for The Sims Bustin' Out GBA, and Tamara was on the art team doing character animation. For the Herbs, Tamara became lead artist, and I was EA's assistant producer in charge of day-to-day work on the project. The Game Boy Advance was released in 2001. and it was a portable 32-bit console with a 2.9-inch unlit color LCD screen. Notably, the system measured its memory in kilobytes, not megabytes. The cartridges, called game packs, could store from 4 megabytes to 32 megabytes of game code. There was no native hardware support for 3D rendering, so any game that wanted to do 3D either had to pre-render it into sprites or render it at runtime using low-fidelity software. Loading. Podcast Level 2. The Electronic Entertainment Expo.
Well, thank you for sharing that story. First of all, we worked together at the Kryptonite Games, which kind of became Amaze Entertainment, which owned Kryptonite. It was like a whole family of studios. But I don't think I knew that specific story about the history of Harry Potter going from pixel art to 3D because of that specific incident at the Electronic Entertainment Expo, RIP. Which a large video game convention for basically industry people where the games would be demoed, which is now defunct, but it was hugely influential at the time. That's where you went with your demos and your videos to tell people what the next game was. This was also, the internet wasn't so much of a thing as much at the time.
Or most importantly, E3 was where companies like stores like Target and Walmart and whatnot would go, and they'd have buyers that would go and preview the games in private booths back and whatnot. Yeah. Just throwing that out there.
No, it's really great context. I think people kind of forget that even though we don't have the same challenges with digital markets, there were still gatekeepers. Steam feels like a gatekeeper now, but the gatekeepers then were big box stores or chains. And if they didn't like you on one day of the year, then your whole game's history could be in question. And so you mentioned this move to pre-rendering 3D assets, and years later, people still do that in games. You were just at the forefront. You were at the moment. You walked so we could run in 3D 2D.
The bleeding edge of killing the hand-drawn charm.
Loading. Podcast Level 3. From animator to lead and UI artist.
Yes.
Now, what you describe working on characters is different than what you do today.
Yes, very much so.
I'd love to. How does your work today, how is it similar or different from that more character-focused artwork that you did earlier in your career?
So when I first started out, I was just an individual contributor artist, is typically referred to as IC. And I just had to focus on the animation of the characters. That's all I needed to worry about. And then over the course of my career, I went from being a character animator to a lead artist. And as a lead artist, I had to pay attention to the entire game. And I had to communicate a lot more with different disciplines. And then as that grew and evolved, and I was a lead artist for many, many years until I hit a point of burnout and became a UI artist because that was a little more focused. The way that ended up happening is we were at a very small, it was a small studio and our teams were really small. So UI was just kind of this thing that we didn't have a specialist for. And no one really wanted to do because we had a character artist and a background artist, maybe, and then a lead artist. They were really small teams. So the UI just ended up falling to me, and I just kept doing it and getting into it and getting better at it, and it has become my specialty ever since.
Loading. Podcast Level 4. User experience deliverables for game design.
What you describe really resonates with me because I remember I came from a UI UX background, as you know, and when we were working on Disney Friends, I was like, this isn't even a thing that we do. We don't have anybody hired for it. So it's you and me just you're handling the UI side, and I'm like, I'm gonna do some flows.
Yeah.
For the UI, because that seems like a good idea, right? Because it's not something any other games were doing, but we're we're gonna make this work. We're gonna put time into it.
I think that was actually the first time I'd ever seen a flowchart for a menu system. It was just really sad looking back at it. But yeah, you got to learn somewhere. So thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. And I'm glad it has been so useful over the years. But it just
you
goes to show.
You invented flowcharts.
It's funny. I did not, but more than once in my career, people have acted like I have. This is a little bit of a side note, but when I was working at Amazon on the Echo Look, I would bring flowcharts. When we're doing user experience design, flowcharts are a player's or a customer's movement through time with the software, right? And as you know, screens are a sort of slice, and then the flow helps us move through time. But it's so easy for teams to forget that it's important to do both, not just the slice, but the through part, because that's where a lot of the bugs happen when you're moving between things. It's just been burned into me when I did my education. Like that's part of what we did. So I brought my flow diagrams to the engineering team on the Echo Look, and they're like, "Can I marry you? Like, what is it? What is this? Is this real? Are you going to do more of them?" Like, yeah, I can do as many as you want. We could do this all day. And that was really educational for me, like seeing the way that the engineering teams reacted to it. I still keep making them even as a shared understanding tool, even if we're not talking about UIs.
Loading. Podcast level 5. How user experience improves teams and process.
I think it also speaks to how user experience and UI can be a glue that connects the understanding of a game. Have you seen that in your work?
So what you just said reminded me of a thing that when I first started really getting into like academic UX and reading more about it and learning more, I started to realize that what I was doing wasn't just the UX UI for the product, but also for the team. Because as the lead and as the person focused on UX UI, I felt like I had a lot more information, a lot more of,
Well, there's like service design elements to it, process.
Holistic. The holistic view of everything and how everything interacted with each other. And because of that, like kind of catbird seat that I'm able to see a lot of plot holes and like, oh, we didn't think about this edge case or those kinds of things. It hit me pretty hard when I first realized it. I'm having to make sure that I'm helping the team understand what the problem is and how to fix it, in addition to the game's issue itself. So, okay, cool.
Really deeply resonates with me. I feel myself going back to that over and over again, not just doing user experience or UI, but like helping with process, helping troubleshoot things in the organization. But then I kept being like, well, why me? Why UX? But and so I feel very seen that you're saying this, because it's like, think about what are the basic skills that a UI or a UX professional applies. It's like, we're going to focus on human beings, their relationship with each other or software over time, and look for the places where that might be difficult or where there might be friction. And then you abstract that. You're like, oh, when your brain starts seeing things like that, yeah, I could see how that would help with organizational design. And so that's kind of why in many organizations I've been in, the UX team is like, hey, do you want to run a workshop? just I noticed your process over there is on fire. Do you want, we could workshop that if you want.
Loading. Podcast level 6. Stakeholder alignment through prototyping.
Can you think of a specific situation where that happened to you in gaming, where not necessarily your current job, but in the past, where you were kind of helping the process with your skills?
There was a game that I was working on that does break my heart because it never got released, but it was a mobile game that there was just this unending debate of, do we want to be portrait or landscape, because it was a physics-based game. There was lots of movement and stuff, and they could not agree at all. Upper management wanted a portrait game. The developers, the lead designer, wanted a landscape game. And I ended up just like taking the entire game and like, okay, here's the worst case boss fight in this game on landscape, and here it is in portrait, and here's how much floor space there is, because it was like a rolling marbles kind of game. Here's how much floor space there is to compete against the boss if we go vertical. Here's how much floor space there is in the physics game to if it's landscape. And I went through this whole exhaustive list of like measuring out everything and showing them, because nobody would just believe me that I was like, no, portrait's best. No one would believe me. So I had to prove it out on with hardcore documentation, pixel sizes, all this crap. And then they were like, oh, well, yeah, prove that real simple. Like, yeah, we should go portrait. And that solved that problem. But it was really exhausting because I knew the answer. I knew the answer was portrait, but I had to go through all of the busy work to prove it. Yeah, that made it so that people would believe me a little bit easier the next time, maybe.
Yeah, and what I love about that is, one thing I talk with my folks about is understanding your internal audience, understanding what problems that you're trying to solve, how they're motivated, what they're being rewarded for. And at some point, how did you know that that floor space was going to be a convincing factor for your audience, your stakeholders?
Because it was a physics game, the amount of space for the characters to move around in was critical. It was just with it being horizontal with a landscape, like the floor space for the physics game to take place in was just this really tiny gutter, like just like a bowling alley's worth of. It was just really tight because the characters were high enough, right? So that you need to have clearance for the boss to fully be on screen. And if the boss is on the very back of the background, their head's off screen if you go this way, or like if you want more floor space, they're going to be off screen. So maintaining vertical gave them enough headspace so that the entire boss would show up on screen if they were at the very top of the background, and then just the square footage of the floor was all that was needed to prove it.
What I love about it is you're doing your job well, but you're also exhibiting a really nuanced understanding of the goals of the game and how the game design work. So that discipline, the game designers, they're trying to optimize for a battle that is of an appropriate length. And our core game loop involves this movement on this physical plane, and the size of the physical plane matters. So you know all of these things. And it also demonstrates that like you knew that what the stakeholders were trying to figure out was what was going to be most fun. Yes. And as opposed to like what was most cheap.
With like mobile games, executives tend to want portrait because that is the most comfortable way to hold a phone. I'm not working on that game anymore, and that game never shipped. So
But it demonstrates this, you kind of saw a blip in the process, but not only did you kind of get people past the blip in the process, but you innately demonstrated how to communicate across disciplines in a way that created alignment. And that is one of the most challenging things about making video games is that cross-disciplinary awareness that like, all right, I see the stakeholders as human beings and not people trying to randomize my life. They're probably solving a specific goal. I'll go understand the goal and then I'll talk. I'm so sorry the game didn't ship, but thank you for sharing the story, because at least we get to learn from that specific moment.
It was the most effort I'd ever put into documentation to persuade people up to that point in my career. And it took a lot out of me. That whole thing of grinding to prove something that you already know can be exhausting.
And sometimes it's also because that knowledge, when you just know something, your brain isn't always telling you why you just know it. And it's annoying to have to be like, oh, you're going to have to walk back through all the things that happened in my head before I just knew it. I don't know if I can do that, but you did. And so you ended up going in the portrait direction, so the vertical orientation because of your work.
Yeah.
Well done.
It was a good victory.
Podcast level paused. Begin host commentary. I want to reinforce the point I just made. This is a great example of Tamara demonstrating cross-disciplinary insight. She's a UX UI artist, but she's making arguments rooted firmly in game design. This case study is exactly why I wrote the Game Development Strategy Guide. The most effective game developers are those like Tamara, who seemingly effortlessly couch their ideas not just in what works for them, but context that matters to the many disciplines they work with. That's why the book covers game design, user experience design, art, platform fundamentals, business fundamentals, because it gives you just enough to ask smart questions and work across those disciplinary lines. This is the kind of problem solving video game developers encounter all the time. Subjective, messy, and heavy on the soft skills. Loading. Podcast level 7. The people problem.
What's the biggest challenge someone in your role faces?
Humans. Humans. I will say that because I'm at Wizards of the Coast now, and I have learned a lot about humans in coming here. I can say that. No one thing is going to be right for everyone. The audiences are so widely disparate and have so many, like they have different priorities, they have different things that they care about. Like you're never going to get everyone with one thing, ever. Persuading people, getting buy-off, like that whole thing of you know the answer, but you got to prove it. That's where it gets to be really good to be on a team where you've got established rapport, where there's trust. Because then you can sometimes you can bypass a lot of that, because if you have that trust, people will just know that you know what you're talking about. But if you don't have that, then that becomes an even harder problem. Having trust with your coworkers is paramount to getting things done.
Makes total sense. And
Yeah.
it really resonates, not just with me, but with other folks I'm talking to.
Yeah.
The perception from the outside is there's some sort of technical wizardry. And yeah, there's engines and there's bits,
course.
but it's such an interdisciplinary, collaborative, and deeply human focused art. Because in the end,
Yeah.
players aren't just playing it for a couple hours. These are deep relationships with software.
Lifestyle. It is a lifestyle.
Loading. Podcast level 8. Finding the fun. In all the games you've worked on, what do you think really distinguishes the games that went from survival to thriving?
So the games I've worked on, over 20, and some of those have had staying power far beyond the rest of them. And there is one consistent truth on the games that have had staying power above and beyond the others. And that is that the people who were working on them were having fun while we made them. There was trust, there was rapport, there was crunch, like trauma bonding, lots of trauma bonding. But when the games were a grind to make, they were a grind to play. And when we have fun making them, or, those 3-hour slap happy sessions where let's make the cows tip over and make milkshakes, like, woo! And the engineer sitting next to us like, woo! And that was on
Sims 2?
Sims 2, DS version.
I did voices for it.
Right on. I think I did too.
You probably did. A lot of us did.
Oh, Simlish. Those times when people get into it and have fun and forget that it's work and just enjoy the process and the craft, that's the huge thing. Enjoying the craft, because there's so much not good that comes with it, that when you can really get into the good stuff and the fun stuff, it comes through in the game. I honestly believe that with all my heart. Yeah, just night and day difference on those things, the games that we loved to make and the games that we grinded through.
There's something to that. There was a very playful element to the old school Maxes.
Oh, yeah.
Elvis shrines and beanbag pirate forts and pinball machines, the Bachmanwood bar. But then at Kryptonite, where you and I both worked, you don't need pranks to have fun, but my goodness, they were certainly a symptom of the fun we were having.
Like the Gollum cutout that kept appearing in people's office cubes.
Yep.
Because we actually had Cubicle Farm at that point, and there were a Gollum cutout and a Smeagol cutout, and they just kept hopping around to different
The amount
cubes.
of swag lying around Video Game Studio can be excellent. But there was also the time we filled our executive producer's office full of balloons.
It was his 50th birthday.
It was his 50th birthday. Now, when we say office, it's probably the size of an average person's kitchen. Like, this was like a corner office. It took a lot of doing, and we filled it desk height. And then when we were done with that big reveal, we moved all the balloons to a second person's office who was out on vacation. And then that second person, one of my fellow lead producers, came in, saw the balloons, forgot that he had furniture in his office, and just crowd dived into the balloons and broke the table that was under the balloons.
I missed or forgot that. Oh my goodness.
That was Brian, yeah.
Oh.
And so there was that. And then I went out on a vacation. I came back and y'all had papered my office with Pokemon crepe paper, all of my Stitch doll and everything else, which I was 100% on board for. I still have that crepe paper, by the way.
Nice.
Yeah, those were good memories.
Podcast level paused. Begin host commentary. While Kryptonite Games and their parent company, Amaze Entertainment, no longer exist, they were one of the big players in the handheld development scene during the heyday of the Game Boy Advance, or GBA, and Nintendo DS. Kryptonite's success shipping the Sims Bustin' Out got them the contract for the Herbs Sims in the City on both the Game Boy Advance and as one of the 7 launch titles for the Nintendo DS. Today's guest, Tamara, was my lead artist alongside Episode 3 guest, lead designer Amy Calson. Loading. Podcast level 9. Coping with short shipping timelines.
We tried hard on Disney Friends not to crunch, but a lot of times there are things you can't control in video games, and the silliness can help get you through difficult times.
Yeah, the time in the trenches, for sure.
Working on the Herbs for the DS and Game Boy that was crunchy because of things not necessarily that we didn't control, because a lot of people don't understand that those games were made on like a 9-month timeline.
I remember. Yeah.
We remember.
One of my favorite Sim stories that I love to tell over and over again, because it's just brutal. As I was the art lead on that, and I was putting together the asset list and combing through the design doc and reading between the lines of like, oh, this paragraph, you actually called for 100 new assets. Did you realize that? Stuff like that. So I put together the whole asset list and put the time estimates on it and went to the producer and was like, hey, this is going to require 536 days of artwork. We have like 2 months and we have like 3 artists. What do you want to do? And his answer, I swear to God, was just make the art take less time. I love that answer. I stayed totally calm and cool in response to that answer. We cut a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We crunched, we cut more. A lot of things ended up getting, rather than having animation, they had 1 frame. We cut every single corner we could. And somehow we managed to get it done. But man, oh man, that was brutal. It was brutal.
Podcast level paused. Begin host commentary. Before we start talking about console launch title experience, a note. The trials of working on a launch title are not specific to the Nintendo DS. They're used as an example. Any launch title is new hardware and is equally challenging. Loading. Podcast level 10. The challenges of shipping a console launch title.
In this situation, we're talking about the herbs for the Game Boy Advance and Nintendo DS, yes? The herbs would have been the one with the most compressed timeline, because you and I worked together on Bustin' Out and herbs, but herbs had the added situation where we had just come off Sims Bustin' Out on Game Boy Advance. It had done well, but the Game Boy Advance was dying. They wanted to get a sequel out, and then we signed on as a launch title for the Nintendo DS, which had a very hard ship date.
I was not the lead on that one. Kevin Chung was the lead on the DS version. I was the lead on the GBA version. Yeah.
But a lot of our assets went over to the DS version. There was like a plus of content that was on the DS because it had a bigger cartridge. But like the core of the game was the same. But so that was a very aggressive ship timeline. And also...
And it was a new platform.
Yes.
We didn't know what the hell we were doing. Nobody did. Yeah. And the time spent trying to figure out how many pixels is the gap between the screens. I can't figure out.
And no one knew, because like you wanted to create these immersive scrolling effects and things, and that looked so simple to players. It required information that didn't exist. And what a blessing it was for us being early career to get to learn all of that. But also, boy, it was intense. That was crunchy crunch. And, sometimes things are out of your control when you're on like launch platform. You're like, uh-oh, the requirements changed, or uh-oh, we don't understand why the build's performing this way. We got to wait till Japan wakes up so they can reply to a question about this very strange bug we're seeing.
Loading. Podcast level 11. Minimum lovable games.
Thank you for the example of going through the game design document and identifying assets, because that's a big part of the art life, right? Is going through and taking this big concept and making it reality. Be like, that's so great. I love your vision. There's a lot of individual bits in this vision that we need to talk about. You had a producer say, make it take less time. I was on the EA side at that time, so that was probably partially our fault. I don't know. Everybody had big dreams for that game. But you mentioned some pretty hard cuts that were made. And what's important to note was all of those cuts were made, and people are still playing that game now. And mind you, they don't sell the Game Boy Advance or the DS anymore. You have to jump through some significant hoops to play that game. And you sent to a bunch of us who had worked on the game just a couple weeks ago, like a new playthrough video that had come out and was very like warm and fuzzy about the game.
And the comment section on YouTube was all full of love. It was so like to be able to swim in the comments on YouTube and just feel warm fuzzies was so great.
It was very healing in a way I didn't expect.
But there's also the aspect of it was our sequel. Like to us, it was a sequel because we had just gotten done with there's a Sims Bustin' Out, and then Herbs came after that, which is why for me it all blurs together because it was just several years of Sims. Yeah. Every time that you make a game, when you finish it, you're like, I wish we'd done that better, or that kind of So we've been through when we got to the Herbs, we've been through the Sims license, so we knew we knew the basics, right? So it was that kind of like, and every single time you do it, you want to do it better because you've learned.
Podcast level paused. Begin host commentary. You're going to hear the terms publisher and developer thrown around a lot. If you're a fan of the industry or new and need some context, the game developer is the team that's actually building and coding the game. The publisher distributes the game. They don't always build the game. In the case of the Herbs, Sims in the City, Kryptonite Games was the developer. and Electronic Arts was the publisher.
Loading podcast level 12 between publisher and developer.
So there we are on a launch title.
Sims Busted Out was only GBA.
Yeah.
Herbs was GBA and DS, and it was a launch title. And then Kryptonite also shipped Sims 2, which was your second Sims title on the DS. But Herbs was the moment in time where you dual shipped on both platforms and was a launch title on Nintendo DS. I remember this very clearly because I had to go up on stage and present the game for 20 minutes at the Nintendo press event launch.
You were still the enemy at that point, the publisher.
Yeah, that was...
And you kept coming in and living at the studio with us.
I don't know if we have time to unpack all of that, but, if we're just getting into our relationship for a second, I was the publisher producer I was an assistant producer at EA. My manager was often called away, so often I was the person people had to deal with when, we were getting built. And then eventually I decided I did not want to work at EA anymore for various reasons, including the 80-hour weeks. But also, I loved the time I spent with y'all. When I would go on business trips, Virginia would let me stay out here for 3 weeks at a time. I loved it. I loved being directly on the games, and I felt like I could help more. But then when I went to go interview, Tamara asks me in the middle of a panel interview, how do we know you're not just a spy for EA?
Well, were you?
I don't know. You tell me.
No. God, that's hilarious. I don't remember that at all.
Loading podcast level 13 Grandpa Game Boy.
To what you're saying, I do want to shout out to Steve Ettinger, who was our studio papa. Grandpa Game Boy was his name. He's still with us. He was the heart of that place. I want to say he handpicked all the employees. I'm not completely sure that's true, but it felt like it.
It did. He would come in and tell us sometimes, I just hired this person who I think you're really going to get along with for this and that reasons.
Yeah. He did such a good job of staffing and keeping that studio running. I will just forever love that man.
Both Steve and JC Connors, they created an environment in which good games could thrive. And I think that's part of what I tell my students. I teach at Carnegie Mellon, the Masters of Entertainment Industry Management, and it's 12 hours of class. I'm I can't teach you how to make games in 12 hours. But what I can talk to you about is how to think about making environments in which good games can be created.
To that point, Steve had a background in psychology, and that was just there. I never questioned, that is why he knows what he's doing in building this team. Yeah, all that kind of information can help you.
And with that great power, he chose great responsibility and used it wisely. People can use that in other ways, especially in the video game industry, which was known for being abusive. But that studio took as good care of us as they possibly could.
Podcast level paused. Begin host commentary.
You heard psychology come up when Tamara described the background of our revered Kryptonite studio head, Steve Ettinger. Our guest in week 1, Celia Hoden, also has a psychology background, and my training in human-computer interaction at Carnegie Mellon also included psychology. If you're looking for a discipline that sets you apart and helps you with soft skills in addition to making better player-informed choices, consider expanding your horizons with some psychology training. It's a common thread amongst many successful designers and leaders.
Loading podcast level 14 navigating crunch culture.
When I was I want to build a team and I want to see if I can't crunch, I'm going to build my schedule so that there's time in there. Sure, great, sounds good. We'd like not to burn people out.
It was bragging rights. It was if you weren't there constantly, you were a slacker. The culture was very crunchy at times, which was not necessarily good.
But they were open to change. And I helped some other employees through some coaching challenges there too, where they were being judged for the hours they were there. It was that's your only complaint about their work? We need to talk. That's not a quality issue. That's a wake up issue. Now, the one thing I will say is I had a team that I was asked to join as lead producer because the previous producer had left midstream, and the artists were getting up at 7 and leaving at 2. And the developers were pretty much joining at 11 and staying until 10. And so that was probably the reason why none of the art assets compiled. So you do need to have some kind of communication and collaboration. But
I just want to know what artists can get up at 7 a.m.
I don't know, but it was a whole team. I was I had no frame of reference for this because 9 times out of 10 of video games, it's been a very slow roll, 10 a.m. kind of thing. I think it's with kids and stuff, which is great. Hey, this is demonstrating the importance of flex hours. They're just a little too flex because nobody was talking. And so I had to I don't know that these are a thing yet, but I think we need some core hours, which eventually came up. It's like we should hours when we all agreed that we would be available to talk to each other, and we were able to fix things. Because I don't want people overworking. We can't prevent, oh my God, we're on a lunch and there's a new requirement for the DS and we're all going to be working a little bit. We can prevent like, oh, it didn't occur to us that our client would ask for changes and we didn't account for that in the time. Like so much of crunch was EA's going to ask for changes.
Did we always expect them to ask for changes?
I know.
Always.
But we weren't like, it was like such a basic thing for me. I would like to put a week in each milestone for the changes that will be requested for the milestone. And that was like, boosh.
Loading. Podcast level 15. The power of no.
But there was also the whole thing of like, we already have a contract. They're trying to, like, the contract says we have, like, I remember there being some stuff like that. I don't remember details, but I remember there being like, they can't have that because the contract doesn't say that they get that. Like those kinds of like having to be a hard ass with the client.
Oh, well, you're probably remembering Disney Friends with
that was one of the things where I was like, Cheryl is the best producer I have ever seen, because I had never, ever seen anyone tell the client no until you. And it was just like, my God. And like everyone was like, the courage of telling Disney no, like they loved that, is my recollection. They were like thankful that someone actually finally had the courage to put the priority of the game over, like making sure that the game was good over whatever somebody, I don't remember details, but.
Podcast level paused. Begin host commentary.
In the interest of time, I've cut a little bit of my conversation with Tamara that duplicates some of the things you learn in episode 3 in my conversation with our fellow coworker, Amy Calson, who is also on Disney Friends. But TLDR, Tamara and I talked about how I learned through my time working as a producer with Disney that it was important to get to the root problems we were trying to solve, as opposed to the symptom I was getting, which was a list of requests or solutions. And once we got to that root, we were able to get much more productive. And in this case, get a new extension to the existing project.
Loading. Podcast level 16. The pain of exclusion and prescriptive solutions.
One of the things I have struggled with a lot in my career is getting involved in, getting included in meetings. There have been times where I wasn't the lead and was doing UX UI design, and they would go have leads meetings without me and be like, I kind of need that information. Because what you're describing, like Disney gave us prescriptive answers. When I'm trying to problem solve, giving me prescriptive answers doesn't help me problem solve at all. I want as much data as you can give me. I want all the problems that you can give me, but you give me solutions. Yes, please. But don't give me prescriptive answers, and don't keep me out of the conversation. Like I as UX UI, I might not understand all of the moving parts. Like certainly on but having access to that knowledge will help come at it from a different angle a lot of times. Just exactly what you're describing. But that is definitely one of the biggest problems I've come across is people giving like they want to help, they want to offer solutions. Like that's the whole thing. People and they're in the right that their heart's in the right place.
Most
they want to give you answers. But yeah, don't be so prescriptive, because there might be something else out there that's a better answer. Is definitely a thing I have encountered many a time.
It's so true, especially when the problem is occurring in a high stress, high stakes moment.
Millions of dollars on the line.
Is it when you come in with solutions and you don't show your work, give people options, like it cuts off discussion. It doesn't encourage us to be better than the sum of our parts. And it took me a while to understand that my value was not always having the right answer, but starting the right conversations.
Absolutely.
Loading. Podcast level 17. The simple gift of stupid questions.
I have also found it is incredibly beneficial to be the dumbest person in the room. I've heard that said many a time for UX designers, but I've lost my fear of asking the stupid questions, because usually the stupid questions will either spark another idea for someone in the room or open up a whole new line of dialogue, or just, completely outright, that's not feasible or whatever. But it is very scary, especially when you're trying to establish yourself and like when you're in a new company and everything, and come in and you just keep asking a bunch of stupid questions. There are going to be people who might think you're stupid. That's just going to happen. But over time, they'll see that there's method to the madness, one would hope.
Asking questions is so important, because, if I hadn't asked questions of Disney about how do we get to these solutions, we never would have got that contract extension.
Yep.
And you mentioned courage, right? You're demonstrating it in those situations when you're asking a question. For me, I had to develop this. The second I noticed my brain jumping to a conclusion, stopping and saying like, hey, Can I just ask a clarifying question? When you say blank, what do you mean by blank? You get that, like that one interrupt.
Kind way to ask it too. Like you're so sophisticated with that, where I'm very much just like, what? Like,
well,
this is why you're higher elevated in the career.
Loading. Podcast level 18. The variability of UI UX titles.
My official job title is senior UI artist, which is not what I do, but it's the job title I have. Oh, that's another thing for UX UI people. I have found that the definition of what your job is changes from studio to studio, whether you're doing purely UI design or if you're actually doing UX design. Like those, it can change a lot. And so I just kind of have gotten to the point where I don't really give a flying F about what my job title is. I'm doing the job, I'm doing the work that I love to do. As I get into a team and they start to understand my skill set,
I totally hear you, because UX, UI, this definition for my team, we had to come to that. Like, it was very blurry just within my own team of 7 full-timers. We actually needed to meet and talk about our like different responsibilities and help us figure out what we wanted to be for each other and when we hand off to each other.
Loading. Podcast level 19. Building teams around unique skill sets.
If it makes you feel any better, producers are exactly the same way. Job is different every single studio, even sometimes within the same studio. At EA and Kryptonite, very different things. But what I did at EA as an assistant producer was very different than what my friends on other teams were doing as assistant producers. Like, I was doing whole game stuff, and other people were very focused on single features.
It's actually what people bring to it too, though, right? The people that you were talking about that only got to focus on one thing and didn't get to do all of the stuff. I'm guessing that there were other people on the team who were taking care of those things. And so they didn't have to pick up that slack. Not necessarily that you as an individual bring to your job what you bring. Because I was the only UI designer on the team for the longest time. And then we got the budget to add another person. And so when we were looking for another person, we were looking for someone to complement my skill set. So each team is kind of a homebrew of building skill sets based on what you already have for a well-built team. Although there have been numerous jokes of, gosh, we wish we could clone Tamara. I would argue nobody really wants that. But being the fact that, like, back to that whole unicorn thing of, I can do animation, I can do design, I can build the prefabs, or like I exclusively work in Unity for game development. I have gotten to the point where I don't know if I ever want to learn Unreal. Like, I'm just, I love Unity as a product. I know it really well. So I'm just kind of an expert on making UI in Unity. And that's who I am. And I'm really, really happy with that. It took me a while to get there. But knowing what my strengths are and what I bring to the table helps me be a better team member as well.
Loading. Podcast level 20. Unlocking the power of video game engines.
So you mentioned that you are very comfortable with Unity, and a lot of UI artist job listings request specialty in a specific engine. Can you help our listeners understand why specialization in an engine might be helpful for an artist? Like, what does it help you do that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise?
That's a great question. Thank you. The thing that I have found is the longer you've worked with a tool, the more you know it inside and out, the more you can break it. By that, I mean, this is not actually a Unity example. I think it's actually a Disney Friends example. There was a point where, as the lead, I went to every single engineer on the team to try and understand, how did VRAM work, which was the video memory. I wanted to understand how the VRAM worked so that I could manipulate it to suit my purposes. By being an expert in something, you know what the rules are, and you can't break the rules unless you know them. And that was something that we learned throughout our time at Kryptonite too, because we had been making GBA games for so long that by the end of the GBA's life cycle, our last GBA game it was a Spyro game. I can't remember the full title of it, but it was one where everyone was like, oh my God, I can't believe the GBA is doing all of these things. And that was because we had been specializing in the GBA and we had been building our engine for so long that we knew how to manipulate the device to do things that maybe it shouldn't have, could have. So this is where expertise is a really, really good thing.
I remember Herb's GBA, you had mentioned, oh, well, we had done this a couple of times, and so we knew what we wanted to do or what we wanted to improve. And I remember being the EA side publisher, when we visited Kryptonite to talk about what the plan was for Herb's GBA, and y'all presented to us for the first time the Uberchar system. And this was a new Kryptonite technology. Up until this point on our Game Boy games, there were loading screens. You know, you'd have a map and then you'd have to load the next map. But Kryptonite had come up with a way to gradually load graphics over time. And chars were the smallest unit of
8x8.
It's the smallest unit of graphical loading that we could do. And so the Uberchar system would load just chunks of chars as you walked, so that the player would very rarely perceive map loading, and usually only when we wanted them to, because it was moving indoors from outdoors. So we had these expansive outdoor spaces in the Herbs that we never could have done in Bustin' Out. And that's why Unity and Unreal have become so valuable for so many developers, is because Unity and Unreal solve many of the problems that these systems we describe, you know, this Uberchar system, the internal tools we had at Kryptonite. We created those things because there was no commercially available way to render worlds, to do isometric gaming, to do the 3D rendered, all those things.
Loading. Podcast level 21. Wobbly tools.
I don't want to mislead people, because there are still, even working in Unity, you're still going to have homebrew stuff, especially if you're working on a big enough project where the tools suck. It's just a fact in games. Like, sometimes the tools suck. There are so many times where I'm working one-on-one with an engineer, and engineers are they don't hold back. I love them for that, but they just, this tool is crap. This is crap. We made it ourselves. We could make it better, but it's just, no one has time. Like, the tools unfortunately don't get enough love at a lot of places, because it really requires a big budget. And even then, the big budget doesn't always go to tools. It's a painful fact of life in game development, that you're always going to have to work, well, almost always going to have to work with tools that are not as ideal as they could or should be, because time management is a thing. And getting the game out is always more important than making our lives easier.
As someone who's worked on a platform team, whose job was to make tools to make game teams' lives easier, the problem often was that we couldn't get game teams to give us the time of day. We're like, hi, we would like to work with you to make it a little bit easier to do the thing over time, but it does require some time from you to tell us what you need, or to beta test this thing with us. And so the game teams would continue limping on with what they knew, because it was a known quantity. It's so hard, because when you start out, you're making your first game. Why would you build it reusably? Because that takes more time. It takes more energy. And a lot of decisions get made that are not in the best interest of a game that's lasting for 10 years. And the worst consequence of success is, oh my God, we're still here with this engine. Nobody ever expected us to be here making these decisions. And it's very difficult to unroll the longer you get there. That's why I talked in my first book, Design Beyond Devices, about this optimism. Like, what's the worst consequence of success? Like, maybe some of the decisions you make in your first game, okay, sure, cut a couple corners, but what happens if you do hit it? Is this the decision you're going to be regretting for 10 years? We used to talk at Amazon about one-way doors and two-way doors. Like, is this a one-way door that you can't go back through? Or is this a two-way door?
I have not encountered that tactic yet. That is really good.
And sometimes that mental model is helpful. Like, oh, you're right. We can't ever undo this decision once we make it. And then we will be burdened with this for the entirety of this game engine. And Lord, I have lived that. And to your point, everybody, like from the outside the industry, people perceive it as like, oh, Unreal exists, so everything that Unreal does, everybody should get. No. Basically, you're a time capsule. You ship your first game, and whatever engine you chose, whatever version it was in, the moment you shipped is the version you have forever, because you probably customized that version and you made some hacks and things that you needed to get it out the door, and then that's your forever version. And
unless you have the budget to go, hey, we're going to do an upgrade. And everybody goes, oh, God. And you do the upgrade, and then you have to go through the game and figure out what broke, because you got to,
Yeah.
Loading. Podcast boss level. Waste not. Wi-Fi not.
It's a love-hate thing with engines, but to your point, knowing what they can do means we can push them to their limit. And what I've also seen is that also helps us understand how not to break them when we don't want to break them, which is on low spec devices. When we want the largest audience as possible, you've probably seen this, but I know I've seen this. Well, we would like to keep this game running on a phone with 1 gig or 2 gigs of RAM. You're like, that's cool. That's going to take some creativity to not use this engine to its fullest and still keep the visuals running.
What you're saying is bringing up so much stuff for me. As someone who started on GPA, the whole game has to fit on a 2 megabyte cart. Have fun.
We did that. We did ship on like megabytes.
Huge. Like 10-hour games on a 2 megabyte cart. Amazing. But it's that whole aspect of, because I grew up in the industry in that very keeping things small and tight and limited, and then moving to AAA, and it's just, look at all this waste. Artists making art that is like 10 times the size it needs to be, and like that's taking up space on the person's device. It's okay for when they're working on console or like desktop, like when it's a PC, but we're talking about somebody's phone, and you like keeping in mind that the amount of inefficiency in desktop games and then porting them to mobile is mind-boggling and painful. And it's a debate that I've had with people where they're like, oh, but phones are updating all the time. But it's also about how much, when people are trying to download over Wi-Fi, it is reaching a point where it's not going to matter as much anymore. But it was one of the things as I made the shift from going from GBA to desktop or console is just how extravagantly wasteful with the resources people tend to be. I don't know if it's worth telling people who are new to the industry to worry about efficiency, but it seems like it's a good thing to worry about efficiency.
No, it is.
But in terms of like memory now compared to what it was then doesn't mean as much.
No, it does though. And you and I were raised in the same environment. We were shipping Game Boy games on like 16 megabyte cartridges and loving it, like figuring it out. And I had developed this perception that, oh, file size just doesn't even seem to even matter anymore. But working on AAA live service games, they still want to address the largest market possible. Mobile developers are still operating in a place where they want to ship stuff on devices that maybe the processors are a little bit faster. So we have that going for us, but it's space on the phones. You're competing with someone's entire life, all their kids' videos, all their kids' photos. So you might as well have 12 megabytes half the time. And people will check those download sizes. There's cell phone plans that max out. There's cell phone plans that incentivize you to stay under a certain amount to save money. There are so many things that will drive someone to put your game down because it's too greedy, in mobile especially. What struck me over the last couple of years is how much it still matters. It's such a dying art that we keep confronting it like we were not conservative with what textures we used, how big these models were. And now we've done this big feature release and it's not working on devices we used to be able to support. Oh no. and that makes your audience smaller. And so it matters. It does matter. Yeah. So I'm glad it matters to you. It matters to me. It's a dying art. But if you can take the challenge that Tamara and I are giving you that, hey, we did go uphill both ways and ship games in 32 megabytes. You might be able to ship games that work within a gigabyte or two of memory or have smaller footprints. It expands your audience. What's the worst thing that happens is it works for more people and works better when Wi-Fi is crappy.
What we were just talking about opened the door for dark practices. The anecdote I can give of, there was one place that I worked where the CEO came to us and said, we want you to make your game as big as possible because we want to take up as much room as possible on people's phones so that there's no room for anybody else. There's a lot of really weird thoughts that comes from people. The good news was that after the CEO left, we were all kind of like, yeah, right, buddy. Requests from time to time, they aren't always ethical. That is a thing I didn't anticipate being. Mobile games and free to play and microtransactions really does open that door in ways that I was not prepared for and did not expect. But making sure that you have a strong footing of good business ethics and just ethical behavior can be a thing.
Loading. Bonus level. The importance of networking.
The other thing that I wanted to hit on for people who are new to the industry, one of the biggest learnings or regrets that I've had perhaps is maintaining your networks better. I've had some people tell me that they didn't think school was worthwhile. Like they didn't think that going to school for game development or any of that was a worthy expenditure. And, if you can figure out how to do it on your own, at the end of the day, the proof is in the pudding. For UX, UI, for art, what will get you the job is your portfolio. So if you can manage to make yourself a really strong portfolio without going to school, do it. But the benefit going to school is that you're building a network of people. Like, yes, you're learning the basics of how to make a game, and you're getting a safe place to play to try and like hone your skills and figure out what you're good at. One of the most important things about going to those schools is developing the network, because as horrible as it is, nepotism isn't going anywhere. And a lot of jobs will come down to, there's a couple of people that we're tossing up between, does anybody know any of these people? And if someone goes, yeah, I know that person, and they can vouch for them, you're golden, right? So the more people you know in the industry, the more likely you're able to stay in the industry. That, I think, is a huge learning that I wish I had taken better care of at the beginning, but I know it now.
So many ways to network now. Being in Twitch communities with other game creators, or being at or if there's infinite numbers of Discord communities where you could go find a smaller group of enthusiasts. Maybe it's people who are all trying to break in. Maybe you can find a community where it's people who are, you're already in the industry and you're finding other people who are in there. When I was laid off, was the networking in the community that helped me keep my sanity, and also just help me help other people. Then they helped me. Like, it was just, it was so important to like my response to the layoff.
And then the other feedback, if I had known then what I knew now kind of thing. My start in the industry was at Kryptonite. Kryptonite was an unusual place in that it stayed running. There weren't layoffs. Like, I was there for 12 years. That's a very long time to be at one place. There are very few places where you can have that kind of longevity. But when the layoff hit, I wasn't prepared for it. And my husband was working at the same place. He got hit by the layoff. We were not prepared. Layoffs are a fact of life. They're horrible and sad, but be financially prepared. Keep yourself as financially prepared for that as you can, which I know is really hard this day and age, but that was really important, because that was a very, very scary time. But like, I had started off going with the intention of going into television animation, and the layoffs, like, they don't call it layoffs there. It's just seasonal work. So in television, it's, you have the season, then you don't have a job, and then you have a season, then you don't have a job. Whereas in games, if you're lucky, you can land somewhere where you can stay for 12 years or longer. But being mentally prepared for a layoff is an unfortunate reality of working in games.
I'm so sorry that the layoffs eventually hit you at Kryptonite, but it was a good run. And that seasonality, I saw it at EA too, even way back then when I worked there at early 2000s.
Loading. Final podcast level. Links and follow-up.
Is there anywhere that people can find you online, that like socials or anything you'd like to point people towards?
I have cultivated a low profile in games. Yeah. I'm available on LinkedIn. I was interviewed by Jason Bay for his book on game development career. And I get pings every once in a while for people looking for advice. And sometimes I'll hit the right mood to respond to them. When people just use the automatic, I'd like to get to know you. Like, you're not getting to know me if you're going to use autofill.
I'm completely there with you.
If you want to reach out to someone through LinkedIn who have a lot on their plate, if they're going to take the time, if you want someone on LinkedIn to take the time to respond to you thoughtfully, ask them thoughtfully, because those are the people who I actually take the time to respond to. But LinkedIn is the best way to get a hold of me.
It's really good advice. I know I too struggle with how to respond, who to respond to, and LinkedIn is there, but ask good questions. And often say why you're reaching out to that specific person. Mm-hmm. Make it count. Like, did you just like run a script and reach out to 20 people and hope it mattered? Or did you reach out to Tamara because you listened to this podcast and you really loved her perspective on X, Y, or Z? That's a much different introduction.
Yeah.
Very good advice.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining me,
Cheryl.
Tamara. It has been a joy to reconnect. I treasure all my memories working at Kryptonite with you in that special time. And I really appreciate you sharing your perspective today on your journey, which is super interesting to me, that unicorn space. And I hope that it will shed a lot of light for folks in the industry, not just in UX and UI, but a lot of this advice is very general across different disciplines, because you're a leader too, and you see that. So thank you so much.
Different career types too, like different industries as well. Like it all applies.
I hope our paths in gaming will cross again, but thank you so much for your time.
All right, thank you.
If you enjoyed hearing from Tamara, don't forget to check out how her thoughts were featured in context. In the Game Development Strategy Guide, my new book from Rosenfeld Media, Tamara is featured alongside 14 other industry experts in a guide that will help people of all experience levels and disciplines level up their game development expertise. The Game Development Strategy Guide is now available from your favorite online bookseller or rosenfeldmedia.com. Enduring Play listeners can get 15% off at rosenfeldmedia.com through November 30th using the code EnduringPlayS1. Join me next time for another conversation with one of the experts featured in my book as we explore what it takes to create video games that don't just survive, but thrive.
Initiating final credits sequence. Podcast Enduring Play. Created and produced by Cheryl Platts. Copyright Idea Platts, LLC. All rights reserved. Podcast theme composed by Cheryl Platts. To learn more about Cheryl's books, visit rosenfeldmedia.com. Explore the podcast at enduringplay.com. For book and podcast merch, go to ideaplatts.dashery.com. Follow Cheryl on Blue Sky at Funny Godmother. To learn more about Idea Platts, the design education consultancy, visit ideaplatts.com.